Hello there! Today's review is going to be Mythos Tales. I know this review is a little bit late to the party, but I just wanted to share a couple new thoughts I think that some other reviewers really haven't said. Mythos Tales is a game much like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. If you've never heard of either of these games, here's a brief description of what you do. Basically, you get a case. That case is going to be sort of laid out to you in the booklet. And then from there you have a map of, in Mythos Tales, Arkham, and Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you get London. From there, with your map and your directory, you're going to go visit various locations that clues are pointing you towards, visit various suspects that clues are also pointing you towards. You get to question them basically by reading what is in the booklet, and basically that will give you more or less information. Sometimes it's a complete waste of time because maybe you want to go to a location and it's not in the book. If it's not in the book, you've wasted time, you've gone to a location, there's nothing there. There's a time limit to the cases. So you have a specific amount of days to actually gather the information necessary to solve the case. This means once the time limit has either been met or you decide that you have enough clues, you go to the end of that investigation and there is a question section. You're going to answer those questions. If you can answer them correctly, you get points for it. You do get some points subtracted for, in Mythos Tales case, sometimes you go to locations and that will infect your sanity. In other cases, also, if you visit way too many locations, you will get points deducted for that. And that's basically Mythos Tales in a nutshell. Also, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is almost exactly the same thing. There are some minor but significant differences, and let's go over some of those, because that is what makes Mythos Tales worthwhile. For instance, in Mythos Tales, one of the big things I already mentioned is the time limit. You actually have a time limit. You can only visit so many locations before your investigation is over. This is kind of a cool mechanic because it makes the case, one, it moves along, and two, you really have no room to actually doubt your investigation. In Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and just go to location after location after location, and it's completely off base on what you're investigating, but it seemed like the right track at the time. Mythos Tales, if that happens, you've really gone off course, and you're probably not going to be able to answer the questions at the end of the case. Mythos Tales does also a lot of things to kind of flip the formula around. There are certain cases, for instance, where you may have to pursue a suspect, and then you go to an additional encounter, and either you'll get more information or not. One of the biggest cool things is the requirement cards. I really like the requirement cards because it's really cool to actually have to need something to get even more information. So, for instance, some of these requirement cards, they basically signify maybe a key to a house that's been locked. But now that you have a key, you can actually enter the house and you get to read and see more information than you did the first time you visited that location. Other times it's just information. And with that information, when you go to certain other suspects, they may be able to provide more information now that you know that information. And typically Mythos Tales throws in sort of a new rule twist every single case. Sometimes they just build upon a previous rule that has been introduced to you, and sometimes they twist the entire game completely. Now, I do want to go over some of the negatives of the game. So since Mythos Tales does have a time limit, that unfortunately makes the game a lot easier than I feel it should be. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective can feel hard. Sherlock can just solve a case instantaneously. Mythos Tales kind of takes the opposite approach and kind of eases you into the system very, very slowly. You basically, the first case, just for just about investigating anything, you will probably get points for it. It's very easy to get a high score. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If this was the Tales Adventures, then having one that's sort of easy in an introductory base is not a completely bad thing. Unfortunately, we don't really know if there's going to be any more beyond this. Supposedly there are some expansions being written now, but whether they will actually be fully implemented is hard to tell. Also, with that time limit issue, this game's not going to last as long as Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. In the box, at least the retail version, there's only 8 cases. Approximately each case is going to take you anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to complete. Considering me and my group, we played Sherlock Holmes, I feel just sitting there and thinking probably was somewhere in the vein of 2 to 4 hours per case, and some, I think, even breached that 4 hour. Mythos Tales, on the other hand, is just far shorter, much quicker, which is kind of nice in some regards, but it's also kind of disappointing. I think what leads to that disappointment is that Mythos Tales is also incredibly stereotypical Cthulhu-themed game. Almost every single case, if you have a really big knowledge of the Cthulhu mythos, you're going to know what you're up against very quickly. And then, of course, the big negative, which really affects even Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, is the typos. There are quite a few typos in here. Luckily, Mythos Tales does have an errata that fixes 90% of the problems. Now, that other little 10% is really misprintings within the book itself that kind of just prevents you from actually knowing things. Now, none of those mistakes actually breaks the case. You can still solve it, but it does suck that there are a few instances where you can follow a sidetrack, but you can't fully find the information for it. I'm going to give an example here that I will not spoil anything. It's not exactly what happens, but relatively similar. So, for instance, there was one case where the suspect that we were following turned out to be at a bookstore. And basically one person gave us information that the bookstore was north of the river. And you look on the map, and you look in the directory, and you look for every bookstore where they are. And suddenly you notice, oh, there's one here up north, there's another one up north, and that happens to actually be right across the street from the other one, and then there's another one over here, also north of the river, and then, oh wait, there's even a fourth one north of the river. So there's 4 of them across the river. Now at that point we decided to kind of just ignore that thread, because there's really no way we could either waste time and go to all 4 or not. But then the sad thing is looking through the book and figuring out, okay, what did we miss? What would have been helpful? We discovered that if you did go to the correct bookstore, for some weird reason, in the booklet, a note was printed that was from the suspect detailing what bookstore he was going to. And it was obvious that it was not supposed to be printed there. It was supposed to be printed somewhere else. Now again, that doesn't break the case, because you didn't need to find the suspect at that particular bookstore to actually answer the questions at the end of the book. And you didn't get any bonus points for doing so anyways. But once again, it's sort of disappointing that certain threads like that are sort of broken. Now, I will say, thankfully, that is pretty rare. I think I only know of about 2 or 3 instances where that's the case. One for sure, and then another 1 or 2. But for the most part, that's pretty rare. The errata fixes pretty much every problem that happened as we went through the game. Now, speaking of the map and the directory and things like that, there are some things that are sort of weird and wonky about it, and it does feel like in some instances basically someone hit sort of a random number generator and put locations randomly across Arkham without any real sort of thought process to how that it would work. For instance, I mentioned the bookstores and 4 of them being across north of the river. Now, they might not be exactly close to each other, but that still seems like a lot for right north of the river. Other things, I have seen, I believe, several coffee shops that are literally right next door to each other, which maybe in our modern day, a Starbucks right next to another Starbucks is not the most rare occurrence, but I do feel like in 1920s Arkham, I don't think that would happen really at all. I don't think that kind of competition would happen. But again, I could be wrong. It just seemed a little odd to me. Another thing that was a little disappointing about Mythos Tales is that because of our knowledge of the mythos and sort of how Cthulhu typically works, really none of the cases really had sort of this scary element to it, and also you knew what you were up against. There was no sort of suspension of like, oh my goodness, what are we up against? Now I do think that bonus case, that was really cool. That was a really cool bonus case because it was really hard to tell what we were up against. We knew it was something bizarre and something we couldn't quite explain, but it was different. It was very different from the other cases, and I wish more of the cases were like that. I do miss sort of Cthulhu games where they're just too tame now. They don't really have that sort of fear of the unknown as much. I don't mind that sometimes, but I do feel like this is the type of game that really could have ventured in there, especially since this game is 90% writing. So my is Mythos Tales actually worth it? I think, yes, it is actually pretty much worth it. I think if you can grab a Kickstarter copy, even with all the misprints in the Kickstarter copy, you're still going to have a blast. The bonus case that comes with the Kickstarter copy really shows actually what this system and what Mythos Tales can really be. It is a bizarre case that is really sort of hard to untangle just because it is so bizarre. But it is really cool to see them kind of experiment and try something new there. Even more so than the rest of the cases. And I think even if you know the Cthulhu mythos very well, you're still going to have a fun time with this game. Me and my group, even though I have a really good knowledge of the mythos, we still had a lot of fun with this game. Even though it did lead to some weird circumstances where there was one case, again, I'm going to be kind of vague about this to avoid spoilers, but basically I knew what elder god we were up against, and there was at one point where you had to guess kind of a code, and I was like, well, it's this, and turns out I was right, because this case is very similar to one of the Mythos stories that's out there in the Cthulhu world. And so we were basically able to skip ahead because of that knowledge. And that part was, sort of disappointing, but at the same time, we were sort of shocked at the end. How would anybody have gotten through there to get that name and then go back to the location? It's possible, but hard to tell. Never played Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, never thought you were that interested in it, this might be the one to actually try. Because Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, like I said, can be hard. It can feel a little brutal. I remember the first time we played a case, because we've never played a game like this before, we got pretty much everything utterly wrong, because we did not know what to really expect and thought, this is going to be straightforward and simple, and turns out it wasn't. Mythos Tales would at least get you into the system a lot easier, ease you in. You would be able to solve, I feel, all of these cases pretty easily. There's maybe one or two cases that are pretty challenging, but for the most part, they are pretty easy. And even the challenging cases, you probably won't get the really awful score. You'll just get the middle score. There's basically usually three ranges of score. There's one where you did excellent, you solved it completely. There's the middle score where it's like, you solved it, but you could have done better. And then there's the really bad one where, you could have done way better. So really, even though many parts of Mythos Tales did disappoint me, I still do think that if you can grab a copy somewhere out there, it's going to be worth your time. It's relatively short, but it was worth it. We still had a lot of fun with it. Seeing the new twists on sort of the formula of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective that's really the fun part of this. Just seeing ways to kind of tweak that system, having the time limit, having times the requirement cards, and times where you maybe pursue a suspect. There's several other sort of scenarios and rules that sort of twist and turn that formula, and that was really cool to see. Now, there are a lot of negatives to go along with those positives, but I still think in the end, this game is going to be worth it to you if you like that type of game. If you don't, then I would say stay away from it. It's probably not going to convince you that this genre of game is for you. That's it for this review. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment below for maybe any sort of games you would like to see, anything you'd like to see on the shelves if I have it, and sort of just any general comments. I'd be happy to respond and reply as need be. So, see you at the next game night. Bye.